The message arrived on a Tuesday. It came through every communication channel that humanity owned, every satellite, every relay station, every personal device on every colony world. It cut through firewalls like they were made of wet paper. It replaced whatever was on the screen with the face of something that looked like a dragon had mated with a crocodile, and the offspring had learned to smile. War Master Thalvex of the Vrakthari Dominion sat on a throne made from the bones of conquered species. His scales were the color of dried blood, and his eyes burned like two yellow furnaces. Behind him stood rows of warships that stretched to the edge of the frame, each one large enough to blot out a moon. "Humans," he said, and his voice rumbled like grinding stone. "Your expansion into the outer systems has been noted. Your existence has been tolerated long enough. The Vrakthari Dominion hereby issues a declaration of subjugation. You will surrender all 14 of your colony worlds. You will disarm your fleets. You will submit your population for biological cataloging. You have 30 standard galactic days to comply. Resistance will result in extinction." The transmission ended. Across human space there was silence. In the halls of the Galactic Concord, the massive diplomatic station that floated in neutral space and served as the galaxy's parliament, 900 species watched the broadcast with varying degrees of interest. Most of them shrugged. Some of them shook their heads. A few of the older ambassadors quietly removed humanity's file from their active contacts. They had seen this before. The Vrakthari had done this to dozens of species over the last 1,000 years, and the result was always the same. Conquest, enslavement, silence. The Pelori ambassador, a tall creature that looked like a praying mantis dipped in silver, leaned toward the Gathani delegate beside him. "Unfortunate," he whispered. "I rather liked the humans. They made excellent coffee." The Gathani, a squat being made mostly of dense muscle and regret, grunted in agreement. "Good traders too. Shame." Nobody expected what happened next. Dr. Lena Akaffer, Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Concord, requested the floor. She was a small woman by human standards, 5 feet 4 inches, dark skin, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a pair of reading glasses she didn't actually need but wore because she said they made her feel scholarly. She was 63 years old and had spent 40 of those years in diplomatic service. She had negotiated trade deals, resolved border disputes, and once talked a rogue mining corporation into surrendering peacefully using nothing but patience and a very detailed spreadsheet. She walked to the central podium. 900 species watched her. The Vrakthari diplomatic envoy, a scarred warrior named Draven, stood with his arms crossed and his teeth showing. He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected the small human woman to plead for intervention from the Conquered, as so many species had done before. The Conquered never intervened. That was the unspoken rule. The strong consumed the weak and the galaxy moved on. Dr. Akaffer adjusted her glasses. She looked up at the assembled representatives of nearly 1,000 civilizations, and she smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was not a sad smile. It was the kind of smile a grandmother gives before she tells you a story you are not ready to hear. "Distinguished representatives," she said, and her voice was calm and clear. "I have reviewed the War Master's declaration. On behalf of the United Earth Coalition, I wish to formally respond." She paused. The chamber was completely silent. "We accept your challenge, War Master Thalvex. We do not surrender. We do not submit. And we are so sorry for what comes next." Draven's smile disappeared. Not because the words scared him, they didn't. The Vrakthari had heard brave words from doomed species before. It was the way she said it. There was no anger in her voice, no defiance, no desperation. There was something else, something he could not name, something that sat in the pit of his stomach like a cold stone. It was pity. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over each other. The Pelori ambassador nearly dropped his translation device. The Gathani delegate stared at Dr. Akafor with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been the first spark of admiration. Draven transmitted the response back to Warmaster Thalvex. The Warmaster watched it twice. Then he laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed through his command ship. "The little mammals have spirit," he said. "It will make the conquest more entertaining." He ordered the Vanguard fleet to begin preparations. 4,000 warships, 200,000 ground troops, enough firepower to crack a planet in half. It was, by Vrakhthari standards, overkill for a species of humanity's size, but Thalvex was not a subtle creature. He believed in sending messages, and the message he wanted to send was simple: resistance is death. What Thalvex did not know, what nobody in the galaxy knew, was what was happening on Earth at that very moment. 12,000 feet beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that did not appear on any map, a light turned on. It was a small light, red and blinking, attached to a console that had not been touched in 140 years. The console sat in a room carved from solid granite, surrounded by servers and sealed weapons lockers and holographic displays that flickered to life one after another like eyes opening after a long sleep. A message appeared on the central screen. It was only 2 words: LAZARUS Protocol. Across human space, similar lights blinked on in similar facilities. Beneath colony worlds and inside hollowed-out asteroids, and hidden in the crawl spaces of civilian space stations, machines woke up. Communications arrays that had been disguised as agricultural equipment began transmitting on encrypted frequencies. Cargo bays that supposedly held grain and medical supplies hissed open to reveal rows of weapons that had been maintained by automated systems for over a century. On the colony world of New Ankara, a retired school teacher named Yusuf Demir opened a locked cabinet in his basement that his grandchildren had always been told contained old family photographs. Inside were a military-grade railgun, a tactical combat suit, and a sealed envelope with his reactivation orders. He read the envelope. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he picked up the railgun, checked its charge, and called his neighbor. His neighbor was already armed. In the command center beneath the Rockies, General Haruki Tanaka, 71 years old, officially retired, and supposedly spending his days fishing, sat down at the central console and opened a channel to every UEC military commander in existence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Lazarus Protocol is active. You know what this means. You've trained for it. Your parents trained for it. Their parents trained for it. The Vrakhthari Dominion has declared war on humanity." He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something ancient and heavy in his voice, something inherited from 1,000 generations of survivors. God help them. Kethri had 6 eyes, 4 arms, and one very bad feeling. She was an intelligence analyst for the Galactic Concord, one of the best, actually. Her species, the Thessari, were insectoid creatures built for pattern recognition. They could process data faster than most computers and spot connections that other species missed entirely. The Concord used them the way humans might use a magnifying glass, to look closely at things that others preferred to ignore. After Dr. Akafor's speech, Kethri had been assigned to compile a threat assessment on humanity, standard procedure. The Concord liked to keep files on ongoing conflicts, mostly so they could calculate trade disruptions. Nobody expected the file on humanity to be interesting. Humans were traders, diplomats. They brewed interesting beverages and told strange jokes. They were, by galactic standards, boring. Kethri had expected to finish the report in an afternoon. 3 days later, she had not slept. She had not eaten. 2 of her 6 eyes had developed a nervous twitch. She sat in her office surrounded by holographic displays showing images and data pulled from humanity's own historical archives, which, she noted with growing unease, they had never tried to hide. It was all just sitting there in their public databases, open to anyone who cared to look. Nobody had cared to look. The first thing she found was the wars. Not a war. Not even a few wars. thousands of them, stretching back to the very beginning of their recorded history. Humans had been fighting each other since before they had written language. They fought over land, over food, over ideas, over religion, over borders drawn on maps. They fought in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. They fought on water and underwater and eventually in the air. Kethri had studied many species. Every civilization had conflict in its past, but most species had a few large wars and then either destroyed themselves or matured beyond it. Humans did neither. They kept fighting, and with every war they got better at it. She pulled up records from something called the First World War. The images made her mandibles click involuntarily. Millions of soldiers packed into trenches, ditches dug into mud, living in conditions that would have broken any Vrakhthari warrior in a week. Poison gas, artillery barrages that lasted for days, soldiers going mad from the sound alone but continuing to fight anyway. And when it ended, when millions had died for a few miles of ruined ground, humans did something that made Kethri set down her data pad and stare at the wall for a full minute. They did it again, 20 years later, bigger. The Second World War was worse in every measurable way. Entire cities burned, populations relocated and murdered on industrial scales. And at the end of it, humans created a weapon that split the atom itself, the fundamental building block of matter, and used it, twice, on each other. Most species, upon inventing a weapon capable of destroying their entire world, would have panicked. They would have disarmed. They would have built safeguards and treaties and sworn to never touch such power again. Humans built more of them. They built thousands. They pointed them at each other and said, "If you destroy us, we will destroy you too." And then they lived like that for decades, with the complete annihilation of their species resting on the decision of a handful of individuals at any given moment. They called it mutually assured destruction. They even gave it an abbreviation, MAD, and Kethri realized with dawning horror that they had called it that on purpose. They knew it was insane. They did it anyway, and it worked. But the large wars were not what frightened Kethri the most. It was the small ones. She found records of something called guerrilla warfare. Small groups of humans, often poorly equipped, fighting against massively superior forces and winning. They won not through strength but through patience, cruelty, and an almost supernatural ability to adapt. They hid among civilian populations. They turned everyday objects into weapons. They used the land itself as a trap. They fought in ways that had no rules, no honor codes, no predictable patterns. In a place called Vietnam, a technologically superior human nation with aircraft and bombs and chemical weapons, spent over a decade trying to defeat a smaller nation of farmers and fighters. The farmers won. In a region called Afghanistan, the most powerful human military on the planet spent 20 years fighting groups of fighters armed with weapons from a previous century. The fighters outlasted them through sheer, stubborn, unbreakable will. Kethri started cross-referencing human military doctrine with Vrakhthari combat strategies. The results made her feel physically ill. The Vrakhthari fought in formation. Humans invented a dozen ways to destroy formations. The Vrakhthari relied on superior numbers. Humans had perfected the art of fighting while outnumbered. The Vrakhthari used intimidation as a weapon. Humans had stared down nuclear extinction and played card games while they waited to see if the world would end. And then Kethri found something that made her stop working entirely and sit in silence for a long time. It was buried in a human military psychology database, a study on what humans called combat adaptation. The study showed that when placed in life-threatening situations, human brains did not simply react, they restructured. Neural pathways rewired in real time. Stress hormones that would kill most species instead made humans faster, stronger, and more focused. Their fear response did not paralyze them. It sharpened them. And with each engagement, each near-death experience, they became harder to kill. The Vrakhthari were born warriors, bred for combat over thousands of generations. Humans were not born warriors. They were something far worse. They were born survivors, and they had turned survival into an art form that no species in the galaxy could match. Kethri opened a secure channel to the Vrakhthari High Command. She knew they would probably ignore her. The Conquered was supposed to be neutral, and the Vrakhthari did not take advice from insectoids, but she had to try. She wrote her message carefully. She included data. She included projections. She included a detailed analysis of every asymmetric conflict in human history and the projected casualties if the Vrakhthari proceeded with their invasion. The numbers were not good for the Vrakhthari. She ended the message with a single paragraph. This analyst strongly recommends the immediate termination of all hostile operations against humanity. You have not declared war on a minor civilization. You have declared war on the single most combat-adapted species in the known galaxy, a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history fighting, surviving, and perfecting the art of killing under conditions that would destroy any other sentient life form. They have been hiding this from you. They have been hiding this from all of us. Abort your invasion. Do it now. She sent the message. She waited. The response came 4 hours later. It was from Warmester Thalvix's personal adjutant. It read, "The Dominion does not accept strategic counsel from prey species. Your concern is noted and dismissed." Kethri closed the message. She leaned back in her chair. All 6 of her eyes blinked slowly. "Fools," she whispered to herself. Meanwhile, across human space, the transformation was almost complete. Ships that had been hauling cargo last week now bristled with weapons. Colonies that had looked like peaceful farming settlements had revealed defense networks that could hold off orbital bombardment. Factories that made consumer goods had switched to producing ammunition and combat drones in a matter of hours. And on New Ankara, the outermost human colony, the one sitting directly in the path of the Vrakhthari vanguard fleet, the population had not evacuated. Every man, woman, and teenager old enough to hold a weapon had stayed. They dug trenches. They laid mines. They mapped every valley, every cave, every choke point on the planet. They were not afraid, and that, more than anything else, should have told the Vrakhthari everything they needed to know. The Vanguard fleet launched from Vrakhthari space on schedule. 4,000 warships, 200,000 soldiers. They moved through the void like a swarm of metal locusts, confident and unstoppable. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Fleet Lord Draven stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crushing Tide, and watched New Ankara grow larger in the viewport. It was a green and brown world pleasant by colonial standards. Mountains in the north, grasslands in the south, a few scattered cities connected by roads and rail lines. It looked peaceful, it looked easy. Draven had conquered 11 worlds personally. He knew what a planet looked like when it was preparing to fight, and he knew what it looked like when it had already given up. New Ankara looked like neither. It looked like nothing. No fleet in orbit, no defense satellites, no communications traffic. The entire planet was electromagnetically silent, as if someone had simply switched it off. His sensor officer, a young warrior named Krevesh, looked up from his console with confusion on his scaled face. "Fleet Lord, I am reading no military signatures on the surface. No shield generators. No weapons platforms. The colony appears to be abandoned." Draven's eyes narrowed. He had expected at least token resistance, a few patrol ships, maybe a distress signal begging the Conquered for help. This silence was strange. "They have fled," said his tactical advisor, a veteran named Sarath. "The humans knew they could not fight us. They ran." It was a logical explanation. Draven wanted to believe it, but something tugged at the back of his mind, an instinct that had kept him alive through 11 conquests. The silence felt wrong. It felt intentional. "Deploy ground forces," Draven ordered. "Full assault protocol. Secure the capital city first, then sweep outward. I want this planet under Dominion control within 6 hours." 200,000 Vrakhthari shock troops descended to the surface in heavy dropships. They landed in formation around the capital, a mid-sized city called Konya, and began their advance. The streets were empty. The buildings were dark. Doors hung open. Food sat on tables half-eaten, as if the population had simply vanished in the middle of a meal. Saurath's explanation seemed correct. The humans had run. The first squad entered the city center at exactly 14:00 local time. By 14:03, they were all dead. The explosion came from beneath the street itself. The road collapsed into a pit lined with sharpened metal and packed with directional charges that sent shrapnel upward in a cone of destruction. 12 Vrakhthari warriors died without ever seeing their enemy. Before anyone could react, the buildings came alive. Windows that had appeared empty erupted with railgun fire. Walls that had looked solid swung open to reveal firing positions. Sewer grates popped off and small, fast-moving figures emerged, fired, and disappeared again before the Vrakhthari could return a single shot. In the first 15 minutes, Draven lost 600 soldiers. In the first hour, he lost 3,000. The reports from the surface were chaotic and contradictory. Commanders screamed about enemies appearing from nowhere and vanishing just as quickly. Entire squads were wiped out by traps that seemed to anticipate exactly where they would go. One company advanced into what they thought was a clear zone and found themselves surrounded by a ring of buried explosives that detonated simultaneously, turning a flat field into a crater filled with Vrakhthari dead. And the noise. The humans had hacked into Vrakhthari communication frequencies and were broadcasting sounds, terrible sounds. The screams of wounded Vrakhthari soldiers played back on loop. Strange human music, something fast and aggressive that pounded like a war drum. And between the sounds, a calm human voice repeating a single sentence in perfect Vrakhthari. "You should not have come here." Draven ordered air support. Gunships descended toward the city, their weapons hot. They fired on suspected human positions and reduced several buildings to rubble. When the dust cleared and ground troops moved in, they found empty rooms. The humans had already moved. The rubble itself had been rigged with secondary explosives that detonated when the Vrakhthari soldiers climbed over it. On the bridge of the crushing tide, Draven watched the casualty numbers climb. 10,000, 20,000. The humans were not just fighting, they were herding his troops, pushing them into kill zones. Every retreat led to an ambush. Every advance led to a trap. The Vrakhthari could not find a front line because the humans refused to form one. And then the real attack began. The first sign was a flash on the edge of Draven's sensor display. Then another. Then 100 more. From the asteroid belt, a dense field of rock and ice that orbited New Ankara's star, human ships emerged. They had been hiding there for weeks, engines cold and powered down, drifting among the rocks like predators lying in tall grass. Admiral Yuki Tanaka, granddaughter of General Haruki Tanaka, commanded the UEC Third Fleet from the bridge of her flagship, the Nagasaki. She was 44 years old, sharp-featured, and possessed the kind of calm that came not from a lack of fear, but from having made peace with it a long time ago. "All ships," she said quietly, "execute pattern strike." The human fleet did not charge at the Vrakhthari armada head-on. That would have been suicide. Draven's fleet outnumbered them 8-1. Instead, they attacked from the flanks and from below, targeting the edges of the Vrakhthari formation with kinetic kill vehicles. Simple metal rods accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. No warheads, no explosives, just mass and velocity. Physics as a weapon. The first volley punched through the hulls of 30 Vrakhthari warships as if they were made of cloth. Reactors breached. Atmosphere vented. Ships broke apart in silence. Draven wheeled his fleet to face the attack, but Tanaka had anticipated this. A second wave of human ships, drone vessels with no crews aboard, launched from a different angle, drawing Vrakhthari fire and pulling their formation apart. While Draven's captains chased the drones, Tanaka's real ship slipped behind his fleet and unleashed a second volley of kinetic strikes that shattered his rear guard. Electronic warfare suites blanketed the Vrakhthari communications with static. Ships that had been coordinating seamlessly moments ago were now isolated, unable to hear orders, unable to confirm targets. In the chaos, two Vrakhthari cruisers fired on each other by mistake. Tanaka watched the battle unfold on her holographic display with the detached focus of a surgeon. She gave orders in short, clipped sentences. She moved her ships like pieces on a board, always 2 steps ahead, always exploiting the gaps that Draven's rigid formation left open. Draven was not a fool. He was a veteran commander who had won battles across dozens of star systems. But every tactic he tried, the humans had a counter for. Every formation he adopted, they found a weakness in. It was as if they had studied Vrakhthari warfare for centuries and built their entire military doctrine around dismantling it. Which he would later learn was exactly what they had done. The final blow came 3 hours into the battle. Tanaka ordered her fleet to pull back suddenly, creating what appeared to be a gap in the human lines. Draven, seeing an opportunity, ordered his remaining ships to pursue, to push through the gap and catch the retreating humans. His ship surged forward and flew directly into a gravity well created by a cluster of high-mass decoy satellites that the humans had seeded hours earlier. The Vrakhthari ship slowed, their engines straining against the unexpected gravitational pull. In that window, those precious few seconds of reduced speed and maneuverability, Tanaka launched her final strike. Relativistic kill vehicles, 12 of them, rods of ultra-dense metal fired at 92% of the speed of light. They crossed the distance between the human fleet and the trapped Vrakhthari ships in less than a heartbeat. The explosion was visible from the surface of New Ankara. When the light faded, a third of Draven's fleet was gone, not damaged, not disabled, gone, converted into expanding clouds of superheated gas and spinning debris. Draven stood on his bridge, surrounded by alarms and the smell of burning circuitry, and made a decision that no Vrakhthari fleet lord had made in 600 years. "All ships," he said, and his voice was hollow, "retreat, full withdrawal now." The remnants of the vanguard fleet turned and ran. Behind them, New Ankara stood defiant, battered but unbroken. On the surface, human fighters emerged from their tunnels and trenches and watched the Vrakhthari ships flee into the dark. Nobody cheered. They knew this was only the beginning. On the Vrakhthari homeworld, Warmaster Thalvex watched the battle recordings in his private chamber. He watched them 3 times. His advisors stood around him in uncomfortable silence, waiting for his reaction. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. One of his advisors asked him what was wrong. Thalvex looked at the frozen image of Admiral Tanaka's fleet emerging from the asteroid field, precise, lethal, patient, and a sensation moved through his body that he had never felt in 200 years of warfare. "Fear," he said quietly. "I believe the humans call it fear." Warmaster Thalvex did not sleep for 9 days after New Ankara. He reviewed every report, every sensor log, every piece of footage from the battle until his eyes burned and his claws left grooves in the armrests of his command chair. His advisors urged him to rest. He ignored them. Sleep was for creatures who were not trying to understand how a species of soft, small, short-lived mammals had just handed his vanguard fleet the worst defeat in Vrakhthari history. On the 10th day, he made his decision. He would not send another vanguard. He would not test humanity's defenses with probing attacks or scout missions. He would commit everything. The full military strength of the Vrakhthari Dominion, 40,000 warships, 12 million soldiers, 3 planet-cracking weapons, and the Doom Fleet, an armada of automated war vessels that had not been deployed in 3 centuries because there had never been a reason to. His generals were stunned. This level of mobilization had not been seen since the Dominion's founding wars. It was the kind of force you used to conquer an entire galactic quadrant, not a species with 14 colonies. "Is this not excessive, Warmaster?" asked General Morath, his most senior commander. Thalvex looked at him with eyes that had changed since New Ankara. They were harder now, older. "Against any other species, yes. Against these creatures, I am not certain it is enough." The Dominion war machine began to move. Across 200 star systems, shipyards worked at maximum capacity. Soldiers were pulled from garrison duty on conquered worlds. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of light years. And humanity watched it all happen. They had eyes everywhere, tiny surveillance drones disguised as space debris, planted years ago during routine trade missions. The UEC command knew exactly what was coming and exactly when it would arrive. What they did next shocked the galaxy. They did not retreat. They did not dig in and prepare to defend. They attacked. Captain Marcus Cole led the first offensive operation. He was 38 years old, born on the colony world of Nova Scotia, and he commanded a special operations unit that called itself the Kindness. The name was a joke, the kind of dark, bitter humor that humans used to stay sane in terrible situations. The Kindness was a team of 42 operators trained in sabotage, infiltration, assassination, and what the UEC military handbook politely called psychological disruption. Their mission was to cripple the Dominion's supply infrastructure before the main fleet could launch. Cole and his team traveled in a cargo container, a standard shipping unit used by thousands of merchant vessels across the galaxy. They had modified its interior into a mobile operations center, complete with weapons, medical equipment, and enough rations for 3 months. The container was loaded onto a Vrakthari supply ship by a dock worker who had been bribed with enough credits to retire comfortably on any world he chose. For 6 weeks, the Kindness moved through Dominion space like a ghost. They hit fuel depots and made them look like accidents. They contaminated food stores bound for military outposts with a compound that caused severe digestive distress, non-lethal but completely debilitating. They intercepted communication relays and inserted false orders that sent Vrakthari patrol ships to the wrong coordinates, leaving entire sectors unguarded. They left no evidence. The Vrakthari knew someone was hitting them, but they could not figure out who, where, or how. Paranoia spread through the ranks like a disease. Officers began suspecting each other. Trust, the foundation of any military structure, started to crack. Cole saved the biggest target for last, the Dominion's primary communication relay, a massive orbital station called the Voice of Vrak. It coordinated fleet movements across the entire empire. Without it, the Dominion's 40,000 ship armada would be reduced to individual captains making independent decisions, a flock of birds without a direction. The Kindness infiltrated the station disguised as a maintenance crew. They planted charges on the station's core communication array and its backup systems simultaneously. The operation went perfectly for exactly 11 minutes. Then a Vrakthari security officer noticed that one of the maintenance workers was sweating. Vrakthari did not sweat. The alarm went up. What followed was a running firefight through the corridors of the Voice of Vrak. Cole's team fought with the efficiency and savagery that Kethri's report had warned about. They moved in pairs, covering angles, communicating with hand signals while the Vrakthari security forces stumbled over each other in the narrow hallways. But they were outnumbered badly, and the station's security forces kept coming. One by one, Cole's team fell, each member fighting until their last breath, buying seconds for the others. In the end, only Cole reached the detonation point. He was wounded. A Vrakthari plasma bolt had burned through his left side, and he could feel his body shutting down. He leaned against the wall next to the main communication array, the detonator in his right hand, and opened a channel to Admiral Tanaka. "Admiral," he said, and his voice was steady despite everything. "The charges are set. Detonation in 60 seconds. The Kindness sends its regards." Tanaka's voice came back, tight with emotion she was trying to control. "Marcus, is there an exit route?" Cole looked down the corridor. Vakthari soldiers were closing in from both directions. He smiled, a real smile, tired and peaceful. "No, ma'am, but the mission's done. Tell my daughter I said she was right about the cat. We should have gotten two." The voice of Vrak exploded from the inside out. The blast destroyed the communication array, its backups, and 200 Vakthari warships docked at the station. The shockwave was visible from 3 star systems away. The Dominion's fleet coordination collapsed overnight. When word of Cole's sacrifice reached human space, his last words became a rallying cry. "We should have gotten two," appeared on the hulls of warships, on the walls of bunkers, on the armor of soldiers who had never met him but mourned him like family. Thalvex launched his invasion anyway. Without the voice of Vrak, his fleet was disorganized, but it was still enormous, still capable of overwhelming humanity through sheer numbers. He chose to make an example. The human colony world of Elysium, a garden world of 2.3 million people, was targeted not for its strategic value but for its beauty. Thalvex wanted humanity to watch something they loved die. The planet Cracker reached Elysium before any human fleet could intercept it. The weapon fired a single beam of concentrated gravitational energy into the planet's core. Elysium shattered like glass. 2.3 million men, women, and children died in minutes. The galaxy watched in horror. Kethri wept at her desk, a rare thing for a Thessari whose species had no tear ducts. She wept with her whole body, shaking silently while the footage played on every screen in the Concord. The Vakthari expected humanity to break. Every other species had broken when the planet Crackers came out. The sight of a world dying was supposed to crush the will to fight. Humanity did not break. Humanity got angry. Within 72 hours, a UEC stealth ship, so small it was invisible to Vakthari sensors, delivered a package to the Dominion's largest military shipyard, Forge Station Omega. The package was not a bomb. It was a canister the size of a human fist, and inside it were nanites, microscopic machines designed to consume metal and replicate using the consumed material as fuel. The canister opened. The nanites went to work. Within 4 hours, Forge Station Omega, a structure the size of a small moon, housing 600 warships, was eaten alive. It dissolved from the inside, turning from solid metal to gray dust that drifted into space like ash. Alongside the nanites, the humans had left a message, encoded in the Vakthari language and broadcast on every frequency the dying station could still transmit. Elysium is remembered. This is a proportional response. The next one will not be. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session, but they were not discussing the Vakthari. They were discussing humanity. Kethri presented her updated threat assessment to the Council, and this time everyone listened. Every generation of human conflict produces more dangerous weapons and more creative strategies, she told the Silent Chamber. They do not simply resist their enemies. They evolve against them. The longer this war continues, the more lethal humanity will become. If this conflict goes on for another year, I cannot predict what they will be capable of. No one can. Behind closed doors, ambassadors from 6 conquered species sent encrypted messages to Earth. They were not threats or demands. They were offers, alliance, support, friendship. Because if the galaxy was going to have a predator in its midst, they wanted to be on its good side. That night, Dr. Lena Akafer received a direct transmission from War Master Thalvex. She opened the channel and found him alone, his throne room empty, his scales dull, his eyes haunted. He looked like a creature that had walked into a cave expecting to find prey and had instead found something with far more teeth than himself. He spoke a single word, "How?" Akafer looked at him through the screen, and for a moment her expression softened. Not with triumph, not with cruelty, with something that the War Master in his entire long life had never received from an enemy. Understanding. Because, War Master, she said quietly, you made the mistake every predator makes. You assumed that because we smiled, we had no teeth. The Vrakthari Dominion was dying from the inside. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way a dam breaks, first a crack, then a trickle, then a flood that nothing can stop. For 1,000 years, the Dominion had held 200 star systems and dozens of conquered species under its iron grip. That grip had been built on one simple truth: the Vrakthari could not be beaten. Every species that had tried had been crushed, enslaved, and forgotten. But now, for the first time, the galaxy had watched the Vrakthari lose, not just once, again and again. The footage from New Ankara had been broadcast on every network in the Conquered: the destruction of the voice of Vrak, the dissolving of Forge Station Omega. The images of Vrakthari warships burning and Vrakthari soldiers running played on screens across 1,000 worlds, where conquered species lived under Dominion rule. And those species began to ask a very dangerous question: if the humans could fight back, why can't we? The first revolt happened on Pelax 7, a mining world where the native Pelaxians had been forced to extract ore for Vrakthari warship construction for 300 years. The workers put down their tools, picked up mining charges, and sealed the Vrakthari garrison inside their own barracks. The explosion collapsed the building and buried 2,000 Dominion soldiers under a mountain of rubble. Then Goreth Prime, then the Teshan colonies, then a dozen more worlds all at once, like fires catching across a dry forest. The Dominion was suddenly fighting on 100 fronts. Thalvex was forced to pull warships away from the human theater to deal with internal rebellions, which was exactly what UEC strategists had planned. Human intelligence operatives had been quietly supplying rebel groups with weapons, communications equipment, and tactical training for months. They had not started the rebellions. They had simply made sure the sparks had enough fuel to catch. Thalvex knew he was losing. His fleet, though still massive, was scattered and demoralized. His supply lines were in chaos. His communication network had never fully recovered from the destruction of the voice of Vrak, and every day the humans grew stronger. New ships rolled out of hidden shipyards. Allies joined their cause. Technologies that had been kept in reserve were deployed one after another, each one more devastating than the last. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Nagasaki and looked at the star map that filled her command center. The map showed the position of every known Vrakthari fleet, every rebel uprising, every allied force, and every human ship in existence. It was a picture of chaos, and within that chaos, a path. A clear, direct path to Vrak Prime, the Vrakthari homeworld. "It is time," she said. The combined UEC armada was no longer just a human fleet. Ships from 6 conquered species flew alongside human warships: the Thessari, the Pelori, the Gathani, and 3 others who had decided that the future belonged to whoever stood with humanity, not against it. Together, they numbered 12,000 vessels. Not as many as the Vrakthari had at their peak, but crewed by soldiers who believed they could win, which made all the difference in the galaxy. The fleet moved through slipspace in a single coordinated jump, the largest synchronized faster-than-light transit in galactic history. When they emerged, Vrak Prime filled their viewports. A massive world, red and gray, orbited by rings of military stations and defense platforms that bristled with weapons. The Vrakthari home defense fleet, 8,000 ships, formed a wall between the Allied armada and the planet. They were the best the Dominion had left: veterans, loyalists, warships crewed by soldiers who would rather die than see their homeworld fall. The Battle of Vrak Prime began at dawn, local time. It was the largest space engagement in recorded galactic history. 12,000 Allied ships against 8,000 Vrakthari defenders, fighting across a volume of space that stretched from the planet's atmosphere to the orbit of its outermost moon. The light from weapons fire turned the void into a storm of color blue plasma, white kinetic trails, red explosions that bloomed and faded like dying stars. Tanaka commanded from the center of the Allied formation. She did not throw her ships at the Vrakthari in a head-on charge. She used the same patience and precision that had won New Ankara. She probed. She feinted. She drew Vrakthari squadrons out of position and then struck at the gaps they left behind. The Vrakthari fought hard, harder than they had fought at New Ankara. This was their home, their world, the place where their species had been born. They fought with a desperation that bordered on madness, and for every ship the Allies destroyed, the Vrakthari made them pay for it. But the Allies had something the Vrakthari did not: coordination born from trust. Human admirals communicated seamlessly with Thessari tactical analysts and Gathani heavy cruiser captains. They covered each other's weaknesses. They exploited each other's strengths. They fought as one organism with 1,000 hands. The Vrakthari fought as individuals, brave, powerful individuals, but individuals nonetheless. And one by one, their lines broke. The orbital defense stations fell in sequence, each one dismantled with surgical strikes that targeted power cores and shield generators while leaving the structures mostly intact. The planetary shield network, a web of energy that could withstand asteroid impacts, was disabled by a team of human hackers who had spent 6 months quietly inserting code into the system through a maintenance backdoor that a Vrakthari technician had accidentally left open. By the end of the third day, the Allied fleet held orbital supremacy over Vrak Prime. The Vrakthari home defense fleet was reduced to scattered remnants, and the planet lay exposed beneath them. Tanaka looked down at Vrak Prime through the viewport of the Nagasaki. She could see the city's vast, sprawling complexes of stone and metal that covered entire continents. She could see the rivers and the mountains and the red-tinged forests that grew in the planet's iron-rich soil. It was, despite everything, a beautiful world. Her weapons officer reported that all bombardment systems were ready. They could reduce Vrak Prime to a lifeless rock in a matter of hours. Every tactical calculation said they should. The Vrakthari had destroyed Elysium without hesitation. 2.3 million human lives, burned away in minutes. By every law of war and every cold equation of strategy, humanity had earned the right to return the favor. Tanaka thought about Elysium. She thought about the 2.3 million people who had died there. She thought about Captain Cole. She thought about the soldiers who had fought and bled on New Ankara and every other battlefield of this war. And then she thought about the children on the planet below, Vrakthari children who had not chosen this war, who had not chosen to be born into an empire built on conquest, who were, at this moment, probably huddled in shelters, terrified, wondering if the sky was about to fall. "Stand down bombardment systems," she said quietly. Her weapons officer looked at her. "Admiral." "You heard me, stand down." Dr. Lena Akhafer's voice came through the fleet-wide communication channel. She had been waiting for this moment, had, in fact, been planning for it since the first day of the war. She opened a broadcast on every frequency, in every language, aimed at the surface of Vrak Prime. "People of Vrak Prime," she said, and her voice was steady and kind. "This is Dr. Lena Akhafer, ambassador of the United Earth Coalition. Your fleet is defeated. Your orbital defenses are down. We have the ability to destroy your world from orbit. Every strategic model we possess says that we should." She paused. The planet below was silent, listening. "But we will not. We are not you. We remember what it feels like to be the ones under the boot, the ones looking up at the sky wondering if this is the end. Your War Master chose this war. Your people did not. We will not punish your children for the crimes of your leaders." She took a breath. "We offer you one chance. Surrender unconditionally. Disarm your military. Release every enslaved species in your territory. Submit to a galactic tribunal for war crimes. In return, your people will live. Your world will stand. Your culture will survive. Your children will grow up. This is the only offer you will receive. It will not be repeated. The transmission ended. Silence fell across the fleet and across the planet. In his throne room, Warmaster Thalvek sat alone. His war crest, the ceremonial headpiece that symbolized Vrakthari military supremacy, worn by every warmaster for 1,000 years, sat heavy on his brow. His advisors were gone. His generals were gone. His fleet was gone. He stared at the viewscreen, which showed the Allied armada hovering above his world like a held breath. He thought about everything he had believed, that strength was the only truth, that the strong consumed the weak, that mercy was a defect found only in prey species. And he thought about the fact that the humans, the species he had dismissed as soft, as prey, as beneath his notice, now held the power to destroy everything he loved and were choosing not to use it. He reached up with both clawed hands and lifted the war crest from his head. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight, feeling the weight of 1,000 years of conquest and blood and empire. Then he set it down. The surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. The Vrakthari Dominion, the most feared military power in known space, submitted unconditionally to a species that most of the galaxy had considered irrelevant 6 months ago. The Galactic Concord convened an emergency summit 3 days later. Humanity was offered a permanent seat on the High Council, the first new member in 400 years. Dr. Akaffer accepted with the same calm grace she had shown throughout the war. Kethri, who had tried to warn the Vrakthari and been ignored, published her research as a book. It became the most widely read document in galactic history, translated into 900 languages and studied in military academies on every civilized world. She called it The Sleeping Predator, Why You Should Never Wake Humanity. In the months that followed, human aid workers arrived on Vrak Prime. They brought food, medical supplies, and construction equipment. They helped rebuild the infrastructure that had been damaged during the battle. They worked alongside Vrakthari civilians who watched them with a mixture of confusion, resentment, and something that slowly, grudgingly, began to look like respect. On a quiet afternoon, in a library in one of Vrak Prime's capital cities, a young Vrakthari girl sat reading Kethri's book on a data pad. She was 12 years old, with bright yellow eyes and scales that had not yet darkened to the deep red of adulthood. She read about humanity's wars, their weapons, their terrible and beautiful capacity for both destruction and creation, and she did not understand how one species could contain so much of both. She looked up from her reading. Through the library window, she could see a group of human aid workers helping to repair a collapsed building across the street. One of them, a woman with dark skin and tired eyes and scars on her hands, caught the girl's gaze through the glass. The human woman smiled. It was a warm smile, gentle and genuine, the kind of smile that crossed every boundary of species and language and history. The Vrakthari girl hesitated, then slowly she smiled back. She still did not understand how something so gentle could belong to something so dangerous, but perhaps, she thought, that was exactly the point. Outside the library, the sun set over Vrak Prime, a world that still stood, still breathed, still lived. Not because it had been too strong to destroy, but because its conquerors had been strong enough to choose mercy. And across the galaxy, in war colleges and diplomatic halls and quiet rooms where strategists studied the universe and tried to predict its future, a new truth settled into place beside all the old ones. It was a truth that humanity had always known, but that the rest of the galaxy was only now beginning to understand. The most dangerous creature in any room is not the one baring its fangs. It is the one that has learned when not to bite.